Hello everyone. Right now I wanted to discuss absurdism and, its implications. This is all, open-ended. I don't want you to come out of this and think that what I say is conclusive. I want you to think for yourself as you watch this video, but I do want you to think about the material that we are talking about. Absurdism, it kind of has its roots in nihilism as a philosophy. Nihilism is the belief that inherently, nothing matters and we all die, essentially. However, and so essentially you can do whatever you want. And that's kind of where absurdism comes in, where absurdism, it kind of takes the ideas of nihilism and it adds a little twist to it, and that twist being, well, if nothing matters, and we are in an absurd world where we are oppressed by the craziness around us, that we should actively fight against it, and that we should have our own destiny, our own story to write. And I find that quite fascinating because conclusively it still determines that nothing matters. You die, nothing mattered. However, it's fascinating because it makes me think about the game Deltarune and how it's written as if your fate is sealed from the very beginning. And I really like that because it doesn't matter. That's the whole motif of that game, right? And so it's like that with absurdism, and the whole point is the experience. So it's not about the ending or the beginning. It's about the experience in the middle. And where nihilism, just none of it really matters at all, and the whole story can just be tossed away. You die. Your legacy doesn't matter. Everything you do after you die everything that happens after you die doesn't matter. Whereas absurdism says, you can make your own destiny, and it still doesn't matter. And it's really interesting in the way that it still feels as though your fate is sealed, but you have some level of leeway in what you can do. And so I guess where I'm going with this is in a absurdist world, because I don't necessarily kind of believe in absurdism. I just think it's a very interesting concept. I like the idea of free will being integrated into a nihilistic world. And that is what absurdism does, is it adds free will to the aspect of nihilism. However, that free will ultimately doesn't do anything. And so that's kind of where my issue with absurdism kind of lies, because if you've lived a pretty normal life, you come across people you love and you care about, it's kind of hard to believe something like that from my point of view, because you see these people that you care about and you see them every day, and if nothing truly mattered, why would you mourn for the people that you care about? Like if say a family member passes in your family, why are we mourning them? Doesn't none of it matter? Yeah. So, and from a logical perspective, it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. And they're like, well, you're mourning because that's a feeling, right? But I think it's deeper than that. It is logical to mourn because your feelings have an underlying logic behind them. I mean, if you have learned about CBT, and not the CBT that you think, not CBT Wikipedia, but CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, the concept in psychology, it explores the concept of emotions having an underlying logical process behind it, and how logic, you have a thought, and that thought is logical, and that thought motivates an emotion motivates an action, and that action in turn causes you to do something that creates another thought. And so it goes from logic to emotion to action, and it cycles back. It's an infinite cycle. And how that ties into absurdism is when you're mourning somebody, there is a logical process behind that. And so you can't say, well, it's not logical to mourn the death of somebody if nothing matters. If you truly believe in this philosophy, and somebody dies, you wouldn't mourn them, is what I'm saying, because it didn't matter. And I don't think there's any reason to be attached to anything if absurdism is true, because, well, it's like Alice in Wonderland, right? I mean, you can really just wander if nothing matters. And so, as somebody who has wandered in my life, it can be fun, but it's also extremely dangerous. I don't recommend it. You wander long enough and you realize things get scary really fast. When things get scary, you kind of drop everything, all your beliefs, and you start to open your eyes a little bit and you think, this is it? Like, is there something else going on? Because this whole nothing matters, but I'm forging my own way, this thing is not working for me. And I know that from personal experience that when I kind of just drifted in life, it felt as though it hurt. Not progressing hurts. Why does that hurt? Because it doesn't matter. Well, it hurts because you want to be efficient. I don't know if people know this or not, but I think humans, they want to be productive. There's something about work that gives people meaning. And that's why I think workaholism is so prevalent, and people get so attached to their work and the things that they make. And I think if absurdism is true, what you really have is art. Your art is your best friend, because if nothing matters, if you create a piece of art, something will live past your death. And I believe that Shakespeare, said that my works, shall live on past my death, something along those lines. I don't have a direct quote off the top of my head, but yeah, he said that his works would live past him, and they did, and they were his best friend in that sense. And so if, Albert Camus and his theory of absurdism is true, then somebody like Shakespeare has kind of figured it out, He's got the idea. And it's not just art, though. It's also dynasty, legacy. I think about that in regards to that's what I also think. It doesn't quite sit right with me, because people die, right? But there's a concept in Christianity called the seed of the martyr. The blood of the martyr sows the seeds of the church. And you would think, well, why do these people care that somebody died? It's because they died for something that they believed in. Now that's a very shocking thing, because if you live in an absurdist world, why would you believe in anything? Why would you die for anything? And like I said, I'm going to keep this very open-ended for interpretation. However, people die for things that they believe in, and that inspires people. And so why are people so attached? And let's say that I am somebody who believes in this philosophy, and this is my whole way of life. Why am I so attached? Really? I don't have any reason to be attached to anything, and then why am I being inspired by somebody who's dying? And so that's what I mean by legacy, where somebody passes on the torch to other people, and other people inherit that. And so the idea of a dynasty doesn't logically make a whole lot of sense with absurdism, because nobody has a reason to be attached if nothing matters. And why is it that things can be passed on? Why can ideas be passed on if nothing matters? And how come there is so much suffering, and yet people do something about it, you know? It's inherently illogical from the perspective of an absurdist to say, I want to go out of my way to help somebody and change their life. Because really, changing somebody's life doesn't matter. You can be as selfish as you want to be in an absurdist world. In a nihilistic world, you can be as selfish as you want to be. You can take and take and take, and it doesn't matter. You could be a serial killer, and you could kill as many people as you wanted. That doesn't mean you don't face consequences. It does mean, though, that you're kind of taking an out. You're saying, well, nothing matters, so I don't have an ultimate consequence. I have consequences while I'm alive, like I could go to prison. But say a serial killer, they have so many victims, and then they run away, and then when they're about to get caught, they end their own life to get out of the consequences of being taken and imprisoned. Wouldn't that completely take away the consequences of everything they had just done? Where's the justice in that? And also, why does the concept of justice even matter in an absurdist world? And it makes me think, well, justice is something based on morals, and morals are based on feelings. And I don't think it's that simple. It really isn't. I think justice is a more objective thing. Like, justice is it looks at facts, it looks at a situation, and it says, these laws were broken. These laws were created to protect people, and it has been violated. Therefore, you have been given a sentence. That there's a very non-personal aspect to justice, right? And that non-personal aspect is kind of denied in an absurdist world, where it's almost as if everything is subjective. There is no objective reality in that kind of world, if you really think about it, because everyone's interpretation of what's going on is valid, but everyone has such a different interpretation of the same world. And so it makes you think, well, is there even an objective reality? And I can't tell you if there is an objective truth or not, if the world even is tangible in an absurdist world. I mean, well, it is tangible, like you have sensation, of course. I just mean like tangible in the sense that like you can feel something when you are hurt. But my point is it's very detached. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, I see logical fallacies in this philosophy, and I also see why people would understand the world from this perspective. I think it's a very unique philosophy. It even though it derives its origins from nihilism, it is a valid way of viewing the world. However, that doesn't mean it's a perfect perspective, because no perspective is perfect. I mean, gosh, there's so many different perspectives and philosophies out there, but this is just such an interesting one to talk about, and I've already stated that nihilism just isn't my thing. I still study it and I read about it, but it just doesn't click well with me. It's like, well, that can be disproven pretty quickly. I mean, you have a world in which things matter, and if you believe the inverse of nihilism, it's almost as if you're closer to how things actually are, in the sense that, and you want me to provide evidence for that statement, and I will. My evidence is that when you are presented with hardship and nothing matters, you might as well give up. You might as well shrivel up and die. And an absurdism says you might as well do whatever you want. But my personal experience tells me when you do whatever you want, things get nasty real quick. I could do whatever I want. That doesn't mean that things won't get bad for me really fast, and things get more and more absurd. So it's almost as if you don't follow some sort of moral code in absurdism, then you spiral into more absurd. You essentially you give up the fight to rebel the absurd, and that isn't the point of absurdism. The whole philosophy of absurdism is to rebel against the absurd, and yet you need a moral code to do that, a personal moral code. So, that's all I got. But I'm leaving this up to interpretation. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, because I would love to see different perspectives on this. I'd love to be debunked. I'd love to see like a train of logic behind what somebody thinks when they watch this. Thank you.